Today we're going to get into personas, and personas are a somewhat controversial topic in the UX world. There are a whole bunch of people who've pretty much just sort of discounted them right out, deciding that they're not that helpful. And we'll explain why they probably made that decision today. Because if you do them the way most people do them, they aren't really that helpful. They're sort of performative and UX theater, and they're not really beneficial. But today we're going to talk about a way that gets us out of performance art and into something that's actually a really useful tool. And to start there, I want to just go and tell people who might not be familiar with personas because you've managed to avoid them up to now, that the way people think about personas, like the way the Interaction Design Foundation describes them, is that they're fictional characters which you create based on research in order to represent the different user types that might be using your service, product, site, or brand in some similar way. Creating personas helps the designer to understand user needs, experiences, behaviors, and goals. That's the idea behind personas. However, the way that most people do personas, they aren't helping us understand the user's needs, experience, behaviors, and goals. They don't come anywhere near close to helping us understand that. They are, as I mentioned, just a declaration of different types of users. And so we're going to spend today sort of talking about why, how we've gotten here and what we need to sort of take this further. And one way to think about this is, well, let's use an example here. So the example is that let's say we're working for a company that makes restaurant management software, and this is software that's bought by large uh, large chains of restaurants, mid to high end restaurants, you know, places where you'd go take your family and spend $100 or more at a dinner. Um, that have excellent food, excellent service, but you can find the same restaurant in every city or many cities. So there are companies. There's a company, our company, our that makes management software for these folks so that they can manage the restaurant, all the functions of the restaurant, how the front of house works, it's getting people seated, reservations, that sort of thing. Back of house, the kitchen, making sure orders are processed, keeping track of inventory. The bar area, making sure that the inventory there is tracked, that all the regulations are followed. A lot of these restaurants have little gift shops. Some have big gift shops that you can buy ingredients and foods and cookbooks and knickknacks and just the overall staffing requirements, safety regulation requirements, make sure, for instance, cleaning protocols are followed. So all of these things are the software. So if we're gonna sort of think about users, if we're gonna create sort of these role-based personas, we'd think of a restaurant in terms of the house staff. Those are the waiters and the waitresses. Maybe there's a house manager. Uh, uh, there's the kitchen staff, and there's a kitchen manager, or a senior chef, or maybe an executive chef manager. Um, there's going to be the uh, bar staff. There's probably a bar manager. And There's also, you know, maybe there's a general manager and there's a management team that oversees some of these functions, right? So, well, let's try that again. Management team. So these are the major classifications of people, and this is what we would see uh, in personas. We would see people sort of listing each of these out and saying, okay, and everybody's got different jobs, right? What the house staff does in terms of seating and understanding the table arrangements and taking reservations and understanding how to keep the floor moving is very different than what the kitchen staff does. It's very different than what the bar staff does. It's very different than these things. Even the house manager works differently than the wait staff does. The kitchen manager works differently than the kitchen staff. They have their own functions that they, even if they are also seating people or working during the service as a chef, they have additional functions that they need. So we would use these in a sort of role-based persona function to talk about it. And what's useful about these, what makes this work, is that we can start to divide up functionality. We can, you know, we can create the functionality that's specific to the house staff. We can create the functionality that's specific to the kitchen staff. We can say, okay, the manager has special functions also as in each of those. Same with the bar staff. You know, tracking bar inventory and tracking kitchen inventory are very different things. Um, Handling different elements of the process is different. What the GM does, the general manager of the restaurant, they're overseeing the whole thing, including reporting back to corporate about how the restaurant is performing. You know, they have very different functionality too. So this allows us to classify the major functionality, and to that end, it's fine. But you do that at the beginning of a project, and you're sort of done, right? Once you know what each person does. So this is fairly sort of low value, blunt, upfront work that once it's done, it doesn't really continue to be useful throughout the process because you're not doing anything with what you've learned beyond just dividing up this functionality in this very sort of simplistic form. And so the issue here is that we make a big deal about personas. In a lot of UX process, personas are basically the first thing we do, and it's sort of the thing that makes us different from all the other folks who are working on helping produce this product. Nobody else sort of thinks about the personas. It's a uniquely UX thing. However, when we're done and we've gone through all this ritual and we've worked on our personas and we share them with the world, everybody goes, so what? They're not that useful. It's like, yeah, I mean, that should have taken us about 10 minutes to figure out. Why did we have such a big deal on this? And that's the issue. It actually devalues our work early in the process. If this is the first exposure people are having to UX, it doesn't really communicate how rigorous, how capable we are, because, and mostly how essential we are, because this feels like something that anybody could do. Now, you know, it's granted there are a lot of folks who don't go through the process of figuring out these major classes of users and therefore get themselves into trouble later on. But as a ritual that's at the beginning of the process that's uniquely UX, it really doesn't help our branding if we just stop there. And part of the problem is that we're bringing this idea of personas in too early. If we just called these major user roles and just focused on that, they would be fine. We get them done. We say, we're just going to make this happen. It's pretty straightforward, and we do it. And you know, I see this everywhere. I was working with a company that makes education software, and we were talking about, you know, what the school administrator does. And they said, yeah, school administrators, they're one of our personas. And I'm like, okay, that's nice. And we just sort of rolled on because that wasn't a useful thing to say. I mean, we knew that school administrators were going to need to access the records that the education software kept so that they could do various functions with them. But nothing in that statement tells us what those functions are. Nothing really helps us understand what those functions are. And that's the problem, that we're not really getting to the crux of what makes this work really valuable. And so what happens is that we make these declarations of who our users are, and then once we're sort of through the game of sorting out who gets what function, we don't need this anymore. It doesn't really help us. And this is not what personas were initially designed for. What personas were initially designed for was to really help us understand what is it that users expect, what is it that users want. And just dividing up by functionality doesn't tell us what users want or expect. It just tells us what, you know, how we're going to sort the menus. And so that's where we get ourselves into trouble. So how do we get past that? Well, one way to think about this is to think about, you know, what it means to really deliver great user experience. So we can go and we can start this path. And those of you who've been hanging out with me for a while now know that I keep coming back to this idea that we can measure a user experience in terms of a series of actions or milestones or steps that the user makes, right? After all, an experience is something that happens over time. So this horizontal here represents time. And we can say, okay, so the general manager of the restaurant needs to start reporting back to the restaurant. Oh, actually, I got a better scenario. So the general manager of the restaurant is preparing for a menu change, right? So the restaurant is the whole chain is undergoing a major change in what the menu is going to look like, which means new ingredients, new recipes, new training and certification for all the chefs, all of the wait staff has to be trained in the new ingredients. They have to be trained in understanding what the allergens are. I mean, this is a major deal when a major chain of restaurant decides to revamp their menu. And so they have to go through all this work to do this. So the general manager is preparing for this. And that preparation involves a series of steps that has to be gone through in order for success to occur. And this happens over time. And so we can go meet one of the general managers. And as you know, if you've been hanging out with me, that I always start with meeting the person named Edna. So we're going to meet Edna, who's a general manager of one of the restaurants in this big chain who uses our software. And we're going to see what that menu change process looks like. We're going to understand all the things that are involved to managing that menu change across her restaurant. And we're going to measure this on a scale of extreme frustration to extreme success. So when we do that, we'll note that there are some parts of this process that Edna finds really helpful from our software and is really successful. And then there are other parts that she starts to find frustrating, and then there's more delightful pieces, and then there's really frustrating bits, and it just keeps going on this roller coaster of frustration to delight. And that's how Edna is experiencing not just using our software, but the entire menu change process. And the more we understand Edna and her going through the menu change, the more we're going to be able to design something that works for Edna. But of course, Edna is not the only person out there, so we're going to want to find other people to design for. We're going to want to find, maybe what it's like for Christian to design, what it's like for Taylor to design, right? And or to deal with the design. These are other GMs at other restaurants, and we're trying to understand what their experience is like. But we can see patterns that happen, some of which are caused because of things we've designed in our software, and some of which are things that are just in their experience. And not with our software, but basically we could do something to make it better if we tried hard enough. And our goal is to figure out how to make this delightful, how to take these frustrating bits, make them more delightful, how to make even these parts more delightful. And we can think about this as there are basically 3 places that experience happens, right? There are 3 major segments to this type of experience. There's everything below the neutral line. Anything below the neutral line is frustrating. So everything below that line we can refer to as poor UX, right? And in poor UX, we are missing expectations, and we're not meeting needs. And that's this whole region that exists down here. And that's all well and good. We can definitely focus on that. Understanding the users and what their needs are is key. And then there's this region just above the line in here, and we can call this good UX. And good UX is basically where we meet people like Edna's expectations. It does exactly what they expect it to do, and it meets their needs. Everything that Edna needs the software to do, she can do with it, and it's fine and it's good. It's what we might refer to as usable. But it's nothing to write home about. She doesn't go saying, oh my gosh, this software changed my life. It's just like, yeah, this is the tool I use. I get it done. But we want to get to way above that. We want to get up here where things are incredibly wonderful and delightful. We want to get to great UX. We want this to exceed Edna's expectations. And we want it to anticipate her needs, to actually realize that a menu change is a big deal, and to really sort of guide her through the process and make sure that happens the way she wants, and doesn't put up any roadblocks, doesn't make things difficult. So all of these things are what we're shooting for. We're shooting for exceeding expectation, anticipating needs. We want to get beyond just good UX, and we definitely don't want poor UX. So the question is, how do personas help us get there, right? In order for personas to get there, they need to help us quickly identify where we've missed expectations, where we're not meeting needs, and to communicate that in a way that helps us understand what's going on. And when we're talking about just GMs in general, right, it's very hard to make that assertion, because not all GMs are the same. They're not all doing the same things, right? So there's key here, right? Now, one place we can start is we can start by just beginning to understand the scenarios to begin with, right? Dealing with a menu change is one scenario, but it's different than sort of daily open and inventory management, making sure that staffing levels are where they need to be, checking up and focusing on the different operating functions within the restaurant, making sure that revenues are where they're expected to be, comparing revenues to marketing initiatives that the regional office marketing effort was putting together. There are all sorts of scenarios that the general manager is going through, and each one of those is key. And this is sort of what jobs to be done and other types of sort of scenario identification work tries to get to. Jobs to be done is particularly sloppy at getting to this, but you know, if you work it really hard, you will eventually get it to do something like this. But it takes a lot of effort to get a little value. But but there's task analysis and other techniques that are really effective at understanding, well, what does a general manager do? But what's going to happen when you do the research to understand, well, what does a general manager do, is you're quickly going to realize that there are multiple people who have the title general manager, who have the job of general manager, who are very, very different in how they approach each scenario. And that's where we want to end up, is we want to end up understanding what those nuanced differences are to be able to talk about what are the variations in what a general manager does from one general manager to the next. So let's say we go off and we visit a bunch of general managers. So let's talk about that. So the first general manager that we visited, of course, was Edna. And Edna's been a general manager at a restaurant for 8 years, but not at this restaurant. She's been in the food industry for since she was a teenager, for her entire life, but she's moved into this role in this restaurant as a general manager, and she is new to our software, because none of the restaurants that she was a manager at before used our software. Now, I want to compare her to Christian. And Christian also has been a general manager for 8 years. So like that, has worked in the food industry for their entire life, since they were a teenager, starting as a waitress. Christian has been working as a general manager in the chain ever since they've been using this software. So is very experienced in our software. And the way Christian and Edna are going to approach the task of redoing the menus is going to be inherently different, because Christian has been through this many times, has seen menu shifts many times, knows what pieces of the software to use when, to change the inventory system, to update the ingredient list, to change the staffing training, to do all of the different steps of this. And Christian is very much seasoned in this, and this doesn't faze Christian at all. She knows exactly what to do. Whereas Edna's been through menu changes, but she's never been through menu changes with this software. And this software manages things in a completely different way than she's used to using software, and in many cases it does things she never did before with software. And so now she's trying to figure out how to get the software to bend to her will. She doesn't seem to have the same mental models of how the software works as how she approaches the task of updating the for the new menu. Whereas Christian's mental model matches completely, because Christian's been using this software forever and knows how it works. In fact, Christian was so influential in the software that we've consulted with Christian on how to build it, and the software's been sort of tailored around Christian's needs. So all of that makes perfect sense. We have a third general manager, and that's Taylor. And the thing about Taylor is that Taylor's been a general manager for 8 years, is a veteran of the food industry, but also, been working since, they were a teenager in the food industry. They are also new to the software, but they work at a completely different restaurant than the other two. And the software is new to the whole chain, and it doesn't match how they've been running their restaurant for a long time. So Taylor has been communicating with the other GMs, and they're all frustrated with the product because none of them can figure out how this is actually making their lives better. And it's not tailored at all, or it's just beginning to get tailored to their particular needs. They're in the process of doing that, and it feels like it's changing every day on them. And so I've got 3 people with the same title. They're all GMs. They've all got 8 years of experience being a GM. They've all got extensive food industry experience. But they are having completely different software experiences because they have completely different lives. They are different people doing different things. And as a result, they are going to be frustrated in places that others are not. They are going to be delighted in places that are not. And if we are to really anticipate their needs and exceed their expectations, we've got 3 different sets of needs and expectations to go for. Now, does that mean that you'll have different needs and expectations for everybody? For each, if you've got 1,000 users, will you have 1,000 needs and 1,000 expectations? Probably not. There are patterns. They will start to emerge. But in this instance, there is a tremendous amount of variation amongst these 3 contrasting people. And this is where personas are the most valuable. Personas add value when we need to explain why Edna struggles and Christian succeeds, why Edna and Taylor struggle with different things, even though they're both new to the software. It is these types of things that help us really understand what the subtlety and nuance in the design needs to be. And we won't get that when we just say all GMs are GMs, and we have a bunch of functionality for GMs, and then that's when we stop talking about what a GM is and what that means. So if we really want to help them, we have to first understand the scenario that they're going through. We have to find the scenarios that really are extreme in terms of experience. And we need to then go from there to understand what makes different users different from each other. When we identify patterns, we want to actually pick the person who's at the most extreme of that pattern and make them our persona. So this idea that personas are fictional users, I don't buy that anymore. I used to think that was okay. I'm not buying it at all. Because why do we need fictional people when we've got a wealth of real people who are using our product every day? If we go down the fictional people route, we get ourselves into trouble. Now, there is an issue that we have to pay attention to, which is, we want to make sure that we're not completely dealing with idiosyncratic differences. Tamara Adwin likes to tell the story that, you'll run into a user that always has a parrot on their shoulder. And, do you design specifically for people with a parrot on their shoulder? And the fact is, maybe not. Maybe having a parrot on their shoulder is not an important distinction between Edna and Christian and Taylor. But the issue is that we are stopping far too short when all we do is say our personas are, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them, maybe 8, right? So we have 8 different personas, and that's it. We just have 8 personas. That's not true. Not all waiters wait tables the same way. Not all restaurants implement their table waiting the same way. So we need to understand those differences. Not all house managers work the same way. So we need to understand those differences. Not all kitchen staff works the same way. Not all bar staff works the same way. So we're going to end up with far more personas. And this is part of the problem of thinking about things as product management, right? Product management is not the same as experience management. We need to think in terms of how do we manage the experiences. If we really want to take this to extreme, what we really want to do is say, okay, we need to manage the experience of being a general manager. Who is the person in charge of making the decisions to make sure that all of our different general managers are taken into account? That we have made sure that we are anticipating their needs and exceeding the expectations of managers like Christian, managers like Edna, managers like Taylor. And so what we're doing here is we're moving beyond the sort of framing of we've got 8 personas in our product, and we're going to design for each of those personas by dividing up the functionality and then creating one set of functionality for everybody in that persona. How Edna, who has no experience with the software, deals with the menu change requires that the software is going to have to hold her hand a bit for knowing what to do in what order, what process she wants to follow to deal with this menu change. Whereas Christian is not going to want that hand-holding at all. Christian knows exactly what to do, and that hand-holding is going to get in Christian's way. And Taylor needs to understand what a menu change means in their organization and what pieces the software handles and what pieces the software doesn't handle. And so we need to be able to work with this. And each one of these are real people. They're not fictional people. And we can point to all the different people we met who have the same problems that Taylor had. And we can go and do research with all those people to see if we've made their life better. We've improved their life in some meaningful way. And so we get out of the game of fictionalizing these folks. We don't want teams to imagine what these people are like. We actually want the teams to know what these people are like by meeting them, by getting exposure to them, by seeing how they react to the designs that we put forward, by really getting to understand what makes their life challenging what their experiences are so that we can make sure we're delivering great UX, not poor UX, to each of them. And so the way that we need to do this is simple in concept, hard in execution. And the first thing is go beyond roles, right? Don't stop at roles. If that means not calling the roles personas to begin with, but instead actually making sure that we are focusing on what the specific differences are between people within a role, that's key. We want to focus on extremes, not averages. The trap that we get into with role-based personas is that we average everything. We say the average teacher needs this, the average school administrator needs that, the average restaurant GM needs this. By focusing on averages, we get into imaginary people because there is no actual average person, right? Average people don't exist. So we're building software for people who don't exist. If we want to make sure that we're building a product or service that is for people who exist, we have to look at the extremes. Who is the person who has the most trouble with our product? If we make it better for them, we're going to make it better for a whole lot of people in between. Who is the person who has the best experience with our product? Why are they different? Answering that question, why are the extremes different, opens up a whole range of ways that we can start improving the experiences of everybody. And we need to make sure that our research is proactive enough so that everybody who's working on the product has had opportunities before they start working to meet each different persona that we are representing, to really know what those personas are like, to see the differences between those personas. We don't do that with role-based personas. We say, we get a subject matter expert who used to be a school administrator and we ask them to pretend to be all school administrators. And that fails uniformly. So this is the process of moving to beyond role-based personas. Personas by themselves are not problematic. It's making them purely role-based that gets us into trouble. And that's what 90% of the persona descriptions I see are. So this is the key, is to actually get into the nuance, the subtlety, because it's in those details that great experiences emerge. If we only work on averages, we're going to frustrate everybody equally, and we're only going to be in the world of poor UX. So that's the difference that we're talking about here.
Jared here. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing so you'll get more videos like this. If you have any comments, questions, or thoughts, feel free to drop them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. And hey, consider joining our Leaders of Awesomeness community. It's completely free, home to over 50,000 UX leaders who regularly share questions, ideas, inspiration about their experiences. The link is in the description below. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.